With Lottie's creator's new physics simulator, you can now create real-life-like physics-based animation without manual keyframing. Let me show you how it's done in a couple of minutes. The first thing you need to do is prepare your composition in Lottie Creator. I've prepared this particular composition. For that, we have 7 layers here, 6 balls, and a rectangle that will be acting as my floor for this animation. What I want to do is for these balls to fall from their current position and bounce off this floor like they would in real life. So after preparing my composition, the next thing I need to do is launch the physics simulator in Lottie Creator. To do that, hover over this icon over here that says physics simulator and then click on it to launch it. This window will pop up and this is where we'll be doing all of our simulation. Let me quickly show you the settings of the physics simulator so you can put it to good use. The first thing we need to check out is our global properties. This is the global property that affects the whole physics simulation and not the individual layers in our animation. The first setting under global properties is edge boundaries, and we have 4 edge boundaries here. So you can either turn off or on any of the edge boundaries to determine how confined you want the layers of the animation to be. If I want the layers of the animation, the individual layers, to be able to move out of frame from the left side of the canvas, I can easily turn off the left boundary here, and so the light blue line over here disappeared. So if I start my physics simulation, any layer that comes towards this side will be able to move out of frame. But if I don't want that, I want this to be closed, so all my animations happen within the confines of this frame. I can just turn back on the left boundary. So that's how the edge boundary settings work. You can turn on and off the edge boundaries for your animation canvas. The next setting is the wireframe mode. This is just if you want to see the animation, the simulation in wireframe mode. I can turn this on to show my layers in wireframe mode, then I can turn it off to revert to the initial view. The next general settings is the duration. So how long do you want the simulation to be? So this does not really control how fast or slow the simulation is. It rather controls how much time you want to give the simulation. So if the simulation is supposed to take like 10 seconds and you give it 5 seconds, it will just cut short at that 5-second mark. It will stay there, any position it will be. The extra 5 seconds it needs is not going to be included. So you want to give your simulation as much time as is needed. The next thing you need to set is your gravity, and this is measured in G's. And you can set gravity for the X and Y axis. So for the X axis, that is the left to right. If you want your gravity to affect the layers in your composition from left to right, you are going to set a value in G in the X axis of your gravity tab. And if you want gravity to affect your layers in the vertical way, that's the top to bottom, which is like usually the normal way, even in real life, you are going to set your value in G's in the Y axis. The next setting is insert at playhead. So this is if you want the keyframe for the simulation to start wherever the playhead is. So this is your playhead here. This right here is your playhead. If you want your animation to start at wherever your playhead is, you leave this option toggled on. But if you want it to start at the beginning of the composition, regardless of where the playhead is, you can turn this off. The next setting is keyframe reduction. So how much keyframe do you want to have in this particular simulation? So once the simulation is done, it is automatically transformed into keyframes of position for all of the layers. So how much keyframes do you want in your particular simulation? This is where you control it. For this particular field, the best use case is just to leave it at 50%. I've experimented with 50% on quite a lot of animation and it works just fine. You can increase this if you want lower keyframes in your simulation, in your animation, your composition. Maybe you have quite a lot of layers and you don't want a lot of keyframes. You know, the more keyframes, the more the file size of your animation increases. And these are Lottie animations. They are meant for websites and apps. We do not want a large file size. So if you are in that kind of situation, you can increase this percentage, but be mindful that the higher the value, the fewer the keyframes, but it may affect the quality of your simulation. Your simulation might not really work well. So I'll recommend 50% and below, but 50% works just fine in many of my use cases. And if you've changed anything here, for example, if you've changed this to 20, you've changed this to 20, maybe you're experimenting, you can easily reset any of the settings tab under the settings by clicking reset, or reset everything to default by clicking on reset to default here. So this is the preview window of the physics simulator. So this is where you are going to see everything that is going to be happening with your layers based on your physics simulation. And each layer is colored differently, so you can easily see them and identify them. So these are my balls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is the floor. These light blue lines represent my edge boundaries, and I can turn them on and off in the global settings tab. I can turn off the top one, turn it back on, the left, right, and then the bottom edge boundary. You can control the display of this view with some of the controls here. You can zoom in and out. You can zoom to fit by clicking on this button. And if you've added any layer in the composition but you can't see it in the physics simulator, you might need to refresh your physics simulator. You can do that by clicking on this particular button here. So that's that for general settings. Let's move into individual settings, individual layer settings. So for each layer, you can click on them, and then you are going to have a number of settings you can configure for them on the right side of the physics simulator. So for example, you are going to have settings like the mass of the object, the initial force, friction, air friction, and bounciness. So these are the individual settings you can set for the layers in your composition. So for the floor, I don't want the physics to affect the floor. So what I can do in this case is I can make this static. So it should just stay in one place while the other layers, the other objects will act on it. So that is more representative of the floor. How do I do that? I'm just going to click on the object, that's the layer, and then I'm going to make it static by clicking on the padlock icon in the settings, individual settings panel of the physics simulator. So this padlock icon over here, I'm just going to click on it to make it static. And now it is not going to be acted upon by the physics simulation. All other layers can interact with it, but the gravity, the friction and everything are not going to affect this floor. It's just going to stay in place just like a floor in real life. So for the other layers, the next thing we need to do for the individual layers is to click on them, and then we can draw an arrow to determine the direction in which they are going to move. And also this arrow will determine the initial settings you are going to have in the physics simulator individual layer settings over here. So for example, for this particular ball over here, once I'm hovering over it, my cursor is going to change to this arrow. Then I can click and hold and drag an arrow and then release the arrow. So that will automatically calculate some settings for me here. Watch out this particular panel. I'm going to reset this now, reset to default, and then I'm going to redraw the line. No, this is 0, 0. This is air friction 0.01 and all of those. But once I draw an arrow here, it's going to automatically calculate the settings needed for this kind of simulation for me. And that's like a very, very handy feature that I really love about the Lottie Creators Physics Simulator. You don't need to start doing maths, doing physics to get real life physics simulation. And the longer the arrow, the higher these values. So let's see, the initial force now is 73.2 and this is 248.7. So if I reset this to default and I draw a longer arrow, you see that the settings are way much higher. So the longer the arrow you draw, the higher the initial force is going to calculate for you. So that's like a very, very good feature that I really loved about the Lottie Creators Physics Simulator. So for this, I don't want that much force. I just want small. And if you preview this and you are not okay with any of the settings, you can also just come in here and then change maybe the bounciness. For example, if the bounciness is not enough for you, you can come in here after the initial settings have been automatically calculated for you. You can come in here and change the bounciness, the friction, the initial force, the mass, and all of those. But what I recommend is for you to just draw your arrow for all of the individual layers first, preview your animation, then after the preview, you can now start doing minute changes for the individual layers of the canvas. So that's what I'm going to do for the remaining balls here. I'm just going to draw arrows in the beginning, then I'm going to preview the animation. Once I preview, if it's not okay, I'm going to go in, then do my minute changes. So I've drawn my arrows for all of my ball layers. So the next thing I need to do now is to preview the simulation. And you can easily do that by clicking on the preview button here. As you can see, that was great, but these are basketballs. If you check the original layer, these are basketballs, and that bounciness is not enough for me. So there are quite a lot of options that we can use to increase the bounciness for this particular animation. What we can do is we can either just increase the bounciness of all of the individual layers, say to 1. And to do that at once, you can drag and create a box to highlight everything at once and then change the bounciness. So you can just click and drag over all of the body to select and highlight everything at once and change the bounciness. So for the bounciness, the air friction and the friction, the values go from 0 to 1. So 1 is the highest value and 0 is the lowest value. So I'm going to change this to 1 and then preview my animation again to see if the bounciness is enough. So now we are talking. This feels more like basketballs. And if you notice, my floor layer is not moving. It is just being acted upon by the balls. That is because we made it static. But if you want more bounciness for this particular animation, this simulation, what we can do is we can increase the bounciness of the floor layer too. So let's just make this something like 0.20 just to add extra bounciness to the simulation. And let's see what that works like. So I'm going to preview this. As you can see, everything is now just bouncing more. But this is like too much for me, so I'm just going to remove the bounciness for the floor layer and then preview my animation once again. So that's enough. After previewing your animation and you are okay with it, you are good with it, the next thing you need to do is bake this simulation into keyframes and then insert that keyframes into your composition. And that is super easy with the physics simulator in Lottie Creator. You just have to click on this insert button here and that will be done for you in just a couple of seconds. And this is where these particular settings come in. You can either insert at playhead. For example, if I want this simulation to start at like the 15th frame mark on my timeline, I can leave this toggled on, or if I want it to just start at the beginning of the composition, regardless of where my playhead is, I can turn this off. So I'm just going to turn this off and then insert, so it will automatically insert the keyframes of this particular physics simulation at the beginning of my composition. So I'm just going to click on insert here and then we'll see how the simulation has been done for the layers in our composition. As you can see, it says keyframes inserted successfully. And because we turned this off, the keyframes were inserted from the beginning of the composition, not where our playhead is. So I'm going to close the physics simulator now because we've already done what we needed to do with it. And then let's go back to the beginning of the composition and then play our simulation. This is going to be a little bit jagged because it's a lot of keyframes, a lot of things, and there are a lot of moving parts to this. But mind you, let me just play it to show you what I'm looking like. But mind you, when you finally export your animation, it will be plain portrait smooth. But let me just play it so you can really understand what I'm saying. So as you can see, it is a little bit jagged, it's not very smooth, but this is just for the preview. Once you finally export your animation into .lottie or Lottie or whatever format you are using it, it's going to be plain portrait smooth. So as you can see, this is like a whole lot of time and energy saver. Imagine you have to keyframe all of this manually in, say, After Effects. You're going to be spending a lot of time in the graph editor, in your composition, dealing with scale, dealing with rotation, dealing with position animation. But all of this has been done easily for us using the physics simulator in Lottie Creator, and we do not have to pay a dime for this. Like, this is like one of the best parts of the physics simulator plugin. It is completely free. This kind of thing has been it's kind of possible with After Effects, but you still have to do a lot of work, and they usually come in paid packages. So kudos to the LottieFiles team for creating this amazing plugin. So let's export this animation now and see how smooth it plays. I'm just going to export it to my workspace. As you can see, it is playing buttery smooth. It is not like what we have in the preview window of Lottie Creator. Like this is like jagged, it's struggling because it's a whole lot of keyframes to keep up with. But once I finally export it to my workspace, it is like playing buttery smooth. The animation, the bounciness, everything is working just well and just fine. And from here, I can download this as .lottie. I can download this as JSON. I can even embed in different platforms, enable access CDN, then embed this in my app, embed this in my website, whatever I want to do. So this is like the basic tutorial for the physics simulator in Lottie Creator. If you like more advanced tutorials, more advanced videos on how to use the physics simulator in Lottie Creator to get more advanced simulation, please let me know in the description below of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.